Welcome to Nav Chat, the show for the New Zealand orienteering and navigation sports community. Hey Tom, welcome back for another month.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Very into orienteering at the moment.
Yeah, big month for orienteering. Nationals down in Nelson being obviously the highlight. How was your weekend down there? Well, I mean, how was not just the weekend, but the sprints afterwards?
Yeah, the whole thing was very pumpy on orienteering. We were all very enthusiastic, and especially with teams being announced shortly after and people starting to plan trips to Europe for the first time in a few years. We're all pretty excited. And it was a big schedule down there with 4 nationals races plus 2 national sprint league races after that. I was pretty much cooked on at the end of the relay at nationals, and it was definitely tough doing those 2 days of sprint racing afterwards. So yeah, it's a big program with those. I'm not sure it's the best to do that every time, but it was certainly fun to do it once. Such a big program with so much high intensity racing.
Definitely. We're going to talk a bit about various things later on, but just obviously one of the races that's a big one that week is the relay. How did it go down?
Yes, the relay was quite exciting. There were probably 4 quite good teams actually: Nelson, Papo, Auckland, and Northwest. And we got second, Northwest, and we kind of came from behind a little bit on that last leg to get into that second place. So that was very exciting. And it was really exciting. I think the first leg was a leg I opted out of this time and ran third, unusually. And it was so cool to see some of the top juniors running that first leg and battling that out. Also Chris Vaughan in there with the juniors. It was just quite a different group of people we're used to seeing at the front of the mass start. So that was really cool to see. And they were hitting it out there. They had some very fast times on their first leg, even though Joe Lynch and I were doing third leg. So that was cool.
What do you reckon? I mean, cool. I'm maybe a traditionalist. Maybe I'm just old. I missed the change in format, to be honest. I used to really like I wasn't there, but just seeing the results, I used to like the fact that it was required a junior, a more senior runner, an elite from each club, rather than this current situation we've got with different age groups. I don't know, what was your gauge of the feel this year with this format?
Yeah, I think it's the way to go from now on as the sport gets bigger. I think there's enough top runners in the clubs to fill out a 3-person relay team. Whereas I think 10 years ago, that was definitely questionable. There were only, maybe 2 clubs that would put together 3 elite level runners. And so I think that old format was probably the right format to go. And I think we might have reached a stage where this new format's actually the right format for our sport. I'm really glad from a high performance perspective that we have a relay like that also. Oceania or Australia Champs was the only other time we could do a pure elite relay. So yeah, I'm pretty happy that it's not actually an argument between which one's best. I think it depends on what stage of growth the sport is at. And we're just kind of in that area in the middle where we're switching from a tiny sport to a small sport.
Maybe it will re-emphasize an event like Katoa Po, where there's a more of a mixed club.
I really hope so.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk a bit more about some of the other races later on. Speaking of juniors, you spoke to one of our older juniors and caught up with just kind of where things are at for Will Tidswell.
Yeah, that's right. Will's one of our top juniors going to JWOC again this year. And he had a unique national story, to say the least. So yeah, I caught up with him for some chats.
All right, let's have a listen.
Hey, Jen. Yo.
How are you going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm looking forward to catching up. How was your experience at Nationals?
It was certainly different to what I expected it to be like. It actually wasn't too bad. A week in isolation could have been a lot worse.
Walk us through what happened, because because not everyone is always at nationals. It's a surprise not to see you, but yeah. So what happened?
So me and my mates went up the west coast, and we went tramping. Little did I know that my flatmates had got COVID, and so once we got back into reception, they gave me a ring, be like, "Hey, we're tested positive. You might want to check." And this was a day before the sprint, so I was like, "Sweet, I'll just double check to make sure," because I was feeling a little bit tired, but nothing really. And then turned out to be positive, and so yeah, it was a bit of a weird one because I couldn't say with anyone because it was positive, and all my mates and their families were, they were like a bit hesitant, which is fair enough. And so the government came along in their white van and picked me up and then dropped me off at a really nice hotel actually, and free food and free accommodation. So,
but were you already in Nelson? You weren't at home. Had you come straight from the west coast to Nelson?
Yeah. So, yeah, could be worse.
When was that positive test? Was that the evening before the sprint or for the morning? Sprint. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So everyone's locked and loaded at that stage. Like everyone's got their travel plans are underway by that stage. So yeah, that's a bummer. Did you get to spend much time outside in Nelson? Or were you just hanging out in the quarantine? I'm not actually sure what the quarantine things are like now. Like, I don't know if they've got more lenient, or is it still you're confined to the hospital?
No, they're very both chill and very uptight about it. So they said I can go for as many walks as I want. I can't go more than like 200 meters, or I've got to like confine my walks and wear a mask and not 2 meters. But that was all good. So yeah, I was allowed to go outside, which is nice.
Yeah.
But socializing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll move on. And I have to say, congrats for making the JWOC team again. So how many years of JWOC is this for you? I guess it's a bit hard with the last 2 years not really being counted, but I'll let you kind of count it as you want to.
So overseas wise, this would be my third time going overseas. So first one was Hungary, and then second one was Denmark, and then the 2-year gap with COVID, and so it's Portugal this year.
Yeah, so I do seem to recall that you were quite young when you went to that first one in Hungary, and I wanted to ask a question. So how old were you then?
I was 15 when I went over.
Yeah. Do you think a 15-year-old Will would make the team this year, or do you think like the caliber is getting stronger?
Good question. I'd say no. That's hard because I mean, if you look at the past performances of all the people who got into the team when I got into the team at 15, they were all like really, really top tier, and they were all a lot stronger. I think the people who got into the team this year, they're a lot faster, and maybe better at nav. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Yeah, it's impossible to know. I did notice this year at nationals that a number of those like last 1 or 2 years in junior or like first year in senior grades are really strong at the moment. It was pretty cool to see in the relay at nationals just how many young ones were kind of taking those fastest times. And yeah, so but that's cool that they'd already had JWOC trials and you'd already got some good enough results that it didn't mean too much. It sounds like there were a few other people who were in the team that were affected by COVID, either couldn't run trials but had some good races at nationals. So it's really good there were at least 2 trials this year especially.
Yeah, that's for sure.
What are you looking forward to most this year as you head over for, just checking, your final year as a junior? Yeah. Do you feel a little bit of pressure to get your big results, or how does it feel?
Well, I mean, with the past 2 years basically completely off of orienteering or any sort of sports for everyone, it's sort of, I don't know, for me, and I know a lot of others, it's sort of taken a step back and be like, there are a lot of other things out there. And it sort of meant that because I hadn't had anything to aim for, I haven't really been keeping to my peak as I usually would have. So getting around to it this year and it actually being on, I was like, wow, I might have to start training a lot harder. So yeah, I've started doing that, getting back into my original performance and getting that training plan underway. But yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see if I'm any stronger, because I mean I'm definitely older and that comes with more strength. So I think through terrain I'll be a lot faster, but and I hope I got my nav down. But I don't know. It's always hard to tell in comparison to how the Europeans and Scandis do.
Yeah, it is really hard to know. I haven't personally noticed a good link between the amount of orienteering that I've been doing and how good I perform. Sometimes I'm doing a lot of training because I'm feeling a lot of pressure about performance, and that pressure ultimately leads to too much nervousness on race day, and I do really badly. So coming into a chill isn't at all like a sign of anything bad. So yeah, I think you can do just as well as you've done on any other year, and likewise for everyone else. We're really looking forward to seeing how the team does. It does look like quite a good team. So have you had a look at the terrain in Portugal?
Yeah. So it looks pretty similar to Australia, especially Cascades. Those are the map that I'd probably relate it to the most. So lots of, well, this is for terrain, lots of open-ish bare rock, sort of not undulating, but like nice steepish slopes. Very similar to Australian. So, and I think someone, I'm not sure who, but someone told me there was a correlation between how well Portugal did when they came to Australia for WOC, I think, or something like that. Yeah,
there was a JWOC, so some like a decade ago. That's interesting. And yeah, I'm definitely looking at the Australians to see how well they do, because the maps do look quite similar. Although, the vegetation and the shape of the rocks could look different once you're in the terrain. We'll see. But yeah, that's definitely an observation that I had. And the terrain looks cool. Like it looks detailed and very interesting. So what a beauty to be going to such cool terrain on your final year, and neutral terrain as well. Like not going to Sweden, where like all of the Scandinavians are so optimized for that. It's something that could have a more even playing field. So good for the Kiwis and the Aussies, and also for all of the Central and Eastern European countries as well. So hopefully an open JWOC. So we'll be watching Will and also the rest of the team. It's going to be good. So hey, thanks for spending some time with us.
Hey, thanks, Jane. Awesome.
Just about as good as your nationals, Tom.
Oh yeah, you're just about. It's interesting that there's, I mean, it's going to continue for a couple of years, isn't it? People's race schedules are going to be interrupted by unforeseen circumstances. But I think beyond what happened to him at Nationals this year, it's interesting to hear how someone who's been to JWOC quite a few times, just to hear how their approach has probably changed over that 5 years, just kind of speaks to it's a time of life when people are going through a lot of change and growth in their lives. And I'm sure that people who've been to their first JWOC or their last JWOC will probably reflect and see that the way that they've approached the racing can be quite different from a mental side of things.
Mm-hmm. I definitely felt like only having done 2 JWOCs that I still hadn't really matured. And it wasn't until doing multiple large competitions after that, it was really only on my 4th big time representing New Zealand that I had matured enough to like handle the race day. So Will, having done a number of them, could be in that position as well. And I think you see this with everyone. It's not just doing your last JWOC, it's actually how many you have under your belt. I think
quite high. The pressure thing as well is an interesting one. You asked I can't remember quite how he phrased it, but it was to do with hoping for like some big races over at JWOC in Europe. I think that approach can be like a little bit of a myth. I think trying to think that you're going to do your best performance of the year on the other side of the world in this situation is kind of a bit of a false way to look at it. You kind of, I think, need to have a consistent approach and be running well and just deliver another performance like you've been doing earlier in the year. Trying to do things differently on race day is a surefire way to end up screwing things up.
Yeah, and having been that person who's gone from really high hopes to screwing it up, I am quite frequently passing that advice on that, hey, maybe you should just lock in a top 40, right? And just be satisfied. And I have been accused of being demotivating, and that's possibly true. But I feel like there's some wisdom in what we're saying here.
It's less about, and also that's that like intrinsic versus intrinsic motivations. It's not like you're going to show up to your pinnacle race of the year and suddenly start running 2-minute 50Ks and like navigate perfectly. You should instead be thinking like, what are my key techniques I need to execute really well here? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is not win, we're trying to orienteer well, and then what happens will come. I think kind of following on from this, we can kind of get into one of the big traps that get people in these big events. You, be it WOC, JWOC, Nationals, you come into these events super hyped up, mentally really keen to orienteer well. But on the day, those myriad of thoughts can actually inhibit or negatively impact on what you're trying to do with your orienteering. And one of the big ways it does that is through affecting your concentration. You're unable to focus on the core orienteering skills that you need to execute, and you can't concentrate on what you need to. Shall we? I have the understanding you wanted to go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely keen to talk about concentration. It's very topical for me at this moment after Nationals, and kind of always has been something I've been interested in. And yeah,
do you want to hang it on an example first? Do you want to give us like a scenario, and then we can discuss from there?
Yeah, I think I've got a good example here that I wanted to share.
It's an interesting one because we often think about orienteering as physical training, and we think about our technical training, but there's actually this soft or third pillar, which is the kind of concentration, mental skills, control side of things, which actually allows you to execute the orienteering skills, almost underpins all of the orienteering technical skills.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I want to pose a problem here. I'd like people to consider this is quite technical orienteering. This is a red level course for sure. And I'd like people to consider this start triangle heading south down to 26, 27, 28. And just to imagine running this leg and you leave the start triangle. What's your concentration like at that moment you leave the start triangle? Does it have to be really high? Do you have to be really concentrated? I'll leave that for people to decide. And what about coming into 26 and navigating 27, 28? What's your concentration like when you have these legs that are close together? And I certainly notice that when my orienteering is not good, I will only be concentrating when I'm close to a control. And so when I get these longer legs, I just switch off and just try to run it quite fast. And then I start concentrating when I have to get close to the checkpoint. And so 26, 27, I'll be really concentrated and on the money. And then you give me a longer leg and I completely squander the opportunity to plan ahead because I feel no urgency at all. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Is that something you can relate to? Does your concentration waver depending on how urgent the navigation is?
Yeah, I think a good way, certainly probably the way I think about it is one more to do with like what's your cognitive load. I guess we've got a whole heap of external factors that we can think about. When you're coming to an orienteering event, you've got what's happening in your life, how big is the event, is this something which I'm wanting to really race hard today? You've got kind of this pre-race factors which you can control and optimize to set your state of mind. Then you've got your actual, how is my brain functioning while I'm doing this leg? We could think about our brain, or this is certainly how I think about it with orienteering, as having a certain amount of kind of mental capacity to process things simultaneously. Like a computer, you can only have so many tabs open on your web browser before it starts to slow down. So running a leg from the start to 26, you flip your map over, you've got this really complicated course. It would be amazing to like look ahead and be able to go and do courses that, or to plan ahead and do the controls that come later in the course. But I mean, you can't do that while you're trying to get into the map, navigate through all of these contour features and settle yourself. So you need to schedule all of these different abstract thoughts in such a way that you're not going to overload that cognitive capacity of your brain. Mm-hmm. So using this as an example for me, start to 26, I would probably be largely focused on where I am, where I'm going, how am I going to, in a quite didactic way, apply structured orienteering techniques to this leg to make sure I execute it correctly. I'd resist pulling myself to look ahead at the rest of the course because I want to use all of that mental energy to get into the map. 27, 28, I'm going to be in a similar situation. And maybe if I'm feeling good by that point, I can start to shift some of that mental effort to planning ahead once I'm past control 28.
Yeah, so I think you've outlined the trade-off really well. On the left-hand side, you've got this scheduling challenge of putting in too many things into your head at any one moment and overloading yourself. And on the other hand, you've got trying to maintain high speed and high reliability with your navigation all of the time. And that involves not slowing down because you haven't planned ahead. So before listeners decide what's right and what's wrong, I think you have to know at which stage you are at in your orienteering navigation development. And I think for most of my time in orienteering, the former has been where I should have been hanging out. Just get each control, just one at a time, and don't complicate the issue. Don't overload my processing capabilities. But now that I'm getting better, I'm at the stage where I can start planning ahead quite a lot, and getting that scheduling right is really important to enabling you to plan ahead and not compromise other parts of the course. Yeah,
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think there's this temptation to keep your brain always overload, like to always be pushing further. If you've got a spare moment, you should be looking ahead. But we can also fatigue our mental system, and you need to have periods within a race where you're able to, step out of the like mental anaerobic zone and just give your brain a little bit of a chance to recover. So longer legs, if you've got a 50-50 route choice, choosing to run on a track versus choosing to run through some complicated terrain, if you think it's going to be pretty similar, these can be opportunities not just to give yourself a physical kind of rest, but to kind of back off on that mental concentration load and just allow yourself to drift the concentration level down a bit in order to be able to re-increase it when you need to. Do you have anything you use out there if you can feel like you are if you can feel your concentration waning? Say that you are running this course, say you've done 26, 27, 28, you've got 35, 36, 37, and as you're on your way to 38, your mind's just wandering, you're feeling like you're losing it. What do you use anything to like refocus yourself?
Yeah, I talk to myself, not out loud, but in my head, and I start quizzing myself on future parts of the course. So I'll start asking myself, okay, what's the attack point for the next control? What's the exit direction? And just getting these bits of information prepared and lined up so that when it comes time to tackle that leg of the course, I'm already familiar with the main stepping stones and handrails that are going to be required. And in certain courses, especially like a long distance that has some track running early on, I find I can probably get most of the course planned out quite early by doing that kind of stuff. But then on a sprint course that's intense from the first control, it's really hard to get ahead of yourself. And I'm building a little buffer of maybe 1 or 2 controls, and then that buffer's getting crushed as we go through some short legs in a detailed area. The buffer comes right down and maybe hits 0, and I'm just on the fly. And then I'll try to expand it again. Yeah.
So to help with your concentration, you are more along the lines of trying to re-engage yourself with another challenge of the course if you feel like you're going through a part that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I drifted a bit, but I think to answer your question, I do notice that there is a cognitive ceiling. I can only do so much, but I also notice that a lot of the time I'm not actually close to it. I'm actually just totally faffing in my head. And so I want ways to increase the level of attention that I'm putting on the map. And I ask myself questions about what's coming up. A little someone on my shoulder just quizzing me, like, what about this? What about that? Have you, if you haven't planned all the way to the finish, then you can just keep going. So yeah, I'm trying to rev it up.
Interesting. Yeah. I've used, or in the past, not so much anymore, but I know when I was really struggling with this concentration thing, I would actually say out loud to myself, I'd say, like, if I could feel my mind wandering, I'd say refresh out loud. And in my mind, I'd train myself that whenever I said that, I needed to look at the map and figure out what I was going to next. It was a way to kind of like have the kind of audible cue to kind of like push out of your like internal mental state. Because if you said refresh out loud and heard it, I was like, all right, there's actually other things going on here. I need to look at the map and I need to figure out where and what I'm doing next. So I found that was useful for a while. The other thing which was also useful, but maybe in less intense situations, I can remember when Martin Hoodman was here one summer, him or Ross or someone was saying, if you're not looking at your map, look at your map, as a little kind of like mantra to help when you're really struggling to get into things. So again, that's something else I'll say to myself, not out loud this time, but I'd be like, I feel I'm wandering. If you're not looking at the map, look at the map.
Yep.
It's a way to drive your concentration back in.
Yeah, I was around when Martin Hoodman did that trip over here. We were juniors at the time, just getting into the kind of elite junior level. And we were blown away navigating in the forest with him because he just had his map up all of the time. And it was just so obvious to me. That was a big part of my journey, was just running with Martin for, I think it was just a sprint course, and just watching him like look at his map the whole time. And I realized that no wonder I suck. I'm not actually looking at the map. I'm barely orienteering. I'm surprised I get around the course with how little I look at the map. And so that just was like one day, it was like a massive knock. And we use that mantra a lot. We just write it on our training maps. When you're not looking at the map, when you're not reading the map, read the map. And that really helped to overdrive my navigation.
So I guess to kind of pull this back together, we've talked a bit about concentration and how your physical performance, your navigation performance, it's all underpinned by your concentration while you're trying to execute skills out there. The first step is to identify that concentration can be an issue and to train it, to focus on trying to improve it. Some of the things we've suggested that you could do is trying to acknowledge that there's a kind of cognitive capacity ceiling and trying to manage the amount of decisions you're making at any given point on course to try and push planning ahead to times when you don't have to do so much immediate navigating, and when you need concentration on where you are then and there, not to worry too much about not planning ahead. If you find your mind wandering, some of the tactics you can employ are to re-engage in a later part of the course. The use of mantras, if you're not looking at the map, look at the map, or even verbal or internal monologue cues to refocus. What do you reckon? Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And what you're looking at on the screen is an example I like of a training exercise you can do to test these skills, because it has this contrast between longer legs where the navigation is not urgent and very short legs in detail where the navigation is very urgent. And so you have to come to grips with this scheduling task and find out a technique that works for where you are at in your navigation. And we're all going to be at a slightly different point between wanting to plan ahead all of the time and needing to tackle one leg at a time. So here's a good example, I think.
Yeah. Quick edit to this as well. We've talked about this a lot in the orienteering context. What about the adventure racing context? You could imagine a stage that you're on for 16, 24 hours. You're navigating in the forest. There's maybe some off-track nav. You can't concentrate to the same degree doing something like that. I think the other thing you've got to bear in mind is that you've got a team of 4 usually, where you need to, as the navigator, maintain that concentration, that vigilance at key times, and also communicating to your team that that's required. And I think from errors that we've made over the years, especially navigational errors, it's been because that team communication around navigational urgency and the concentration required hasn't been relayed out to the whole group. So an example might be you're traversing a ridgeline. You need to select an important spur to turn off. Team is trying to be like helpful, or it's the middle of the night and people are just trying to stay awake. And a couple of the other teammates spark up some conversation, just chatting to try and stay awake because they're not navigating. And it kind of breaks your concentration. Or they might get some food out and start trying to feed everybody, make sure you're eating, when actually the priority needs to be on executing this navigational, this difficult navigational step. The communication of that concentration required is something that I think is often missing in navigation within teams. And it's probably something that in our team we've started to do more and more, starting to make sure the team knows exactly what's next and trying to say, hey, we can not concentrate for the next 7 hours once we get onto the spur, but we need the next 30 to 40 minutes to be really focused on clear communication about landmarks you're trying to spot and not getting distracted with other things.
That's really different, but the framework is exactly the same, isn't it?
Yeah. It's cognitive overload. It's I can't engage in a conversation with my teammates and try and eat food and try and make this difficult turn off down a hill. And oftentimes these aren't necessarily they're not your super tight control in the vague contour area that requires an extreme bearing, because it's obvious. It's more here's a kind of turn off a spur that we could miss if we weren't paying attention. And you see it happen time and time again. Teams regularly bugger it up. Cool. So that's plenty of to think about there with concentration. I don't know about you. I don't think it's something I've ever really nailed, especially in big events. But it's something that's possible to work on. You've got some news up for us. We had lots of happenings in New Zealand orienteering over the last month. What are we starting with?
Yeah, just start with a recap of the JWOC team was announced. So congratulations to the 12 that have been selected to go over to Europe. There's also a coach, Brianna Stephen. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good group of talented juniors that will represent us in Portugal this year. So let's have a quick look at some of the terrain here. This is just on the JWOC website. So there's a lot of these big areas of bare rock in quite sparse forest, and the trees are quite far apart. And so some parts look really fast, but then some parts have these spiky bushes on the ground. The sprint isn't...
Portugal we're talking, isn't it?
Yeah, this is in Portugal. So here's a quick look at the map. You can see those clearings and the semi-open scattered trees mixed in with the bare rock in grey. So that's really cool. This is quite different terrain, and I'm really happy it's not a Scandinavian terrain. So it should be more open for many different countries to have a good crack and get in the mix for a terrain that very few people have grown up on.
Although we say not Scandinavian terrain, if you looked at those, it could be some elements: sheetrock, point rock features, vegetation change, some tracks.
Yeah. I think it's
I see what you mean. The vegetation is very different.
the vegetation looks quite different, and I think a lot of the advantage with the Scandinavians is recognizing the contours and the cliffs and the boulders really well in that style of terrain, whereas this just looks on the ground so different. So
Will mentioned Cascades. Is that a map you've run on over in Queensland?
I don't think I've done Cascades, but I have seen lots of maps on Australia that look similar to this, although with less vegetation variation, I think.
Cascades would have at least as much of this vegetation and lots of spiky bush. It's a very tricky map. It's a big, long slopey area in near Warwick in Queensland. Quite tricky. And it becomes what vegetation and rock features can you kind of join up into a coherent line to get to the control. But yeah, I think Will was right on. It would carry some crossover to this.
Yep, and small town sprint. That looks fun. It's always fun hooning around the small streets, cobblestones, little alleyways.
Yeah,
so
great.
That's all fun. We also have the WOC team announced, so I'm heading back over again.
Well done, congratulations. How many WOCs is that for you now?
5-ish, 5 or 6. So yeah, I'm looking forward to racing some of these sprints. I'm looking forward to just having a crack. I'm not I don't know if I'm in good enough shape to make it into the top echelon. WOC is very tough to make it into. It's really about assigning medals to the top few, and it's pretty you often don't get quite so much racing time if you're just there to try to qualify, which could be me in my current running state. It's also good, but it's not. Yeah, the standard is really high now. So yeah, we'll see.
It's also a sprint walk, and I think a lot of the European countries have kind of cracked it with lots of depth now in their sprinters. But New Zealand, I mean, hey, we've got Lizzie and Tim have automatic spots, so we're going to have 4 runners in each of the races, which is we're going to be as big as some of the big teams. And I mean, we've got top 10s from Lizzie. We've got JWOC and WOC medals with Tommy and Tim. I think it's exciting to have a team going, which I think has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our sprint relay, actually. I'm guessing, barring any injuries, that we'll have Joseph and Tim running in the men's, and Lizzie, and we'll see where the other girls are at. But just those 3 out of the 4 is very strong, actually. So that could be a really good shot because Tim and Joe are really fast at the moment.
Yeah. Do you have any knowledge of what the maps look like over there in Denmark, or what you're expecting?
This is an example here of some of the sprint terrain that we're on. There's this mix of urban blocky buildings with internal courtyards and passageways, and then some parkland with
one of the biggest hills in Denmark on that map, perhaps.
Yeah. This is it, basically. Just cut and paste this kind of stuff. Cool. There's another example here. Very, very similar buildings, courtyards. Cool. So yeah, it's cool. It's not super detailed, but it looks fun, and the spectating will be quite good, I think, with these open areas. I'm sure they've got the TVs lined up.
Have they signaled the use of artificial barriers or anything like that this year?
It's just always on the cards. I think they're so cagey about it now. So we're not really going to know until probably the final briefings beforehand. People will ask. Yeah, they're very cagey now. The organizers that realize they actually don't have to disclose a lot of things if it's mapped clearly. It's only if it's ambiguous. Yeah.
And then we're awaiting the World Unis team as well.
Yep, awaiting World Unis team. One thing I wanted to talk about with regards to these big competition races is the level of preparation that goes into these now. And they always give you all these old maps, but now they make it really public about how to access the geodata, the publicly available geodata. And every team who's really serious is making their own maps in OCAD with the right symbols. And that includes us. We've got our own versions of of the race maps, and that's based on LiDAR and other publicly available data. So that's a level of preparation that seems to detract a little bit from the sport philosophically, because the terrain is not quite as unfamiliar as any other race that you haven't really prepared for. But it's that is the way it is. Everyone does it, and if you're there to compete with the best on a level playing field, then you're doing it too. So that's something that instead of making it like cagey that only the insiders and the locals can get the data to make these things, they just make it really clear that there's no insiders. Anyone can get this data now.
The Danish have kind of been they were very much the leaders in lots of this marginal gains through having the access to the maps in advance. So,
yep. And creating your own maps and running them on catching features or virtual O to
simulate. I remember WOC Norway in 2010. They had hypothetically run hundreds of courses on the Trondheim Centrum map, which, I mean, that's 12 years ago. We've now got all this LiDAR stuff, and interesting thing for orienteering to grapple with. And it seems like just letting it all through is the way that it's being dealt with at the moment, because I guess how do you control it?
Yeah, it's kind of uncontrollable. So you might as well level the playing field so that we're all on
secret location. Same page. It could be smoke and mirrors, or that would be the only way to do it, right? Embargo the entirety of Auckland.
Yeah.
And then you must show up to this location at this time.
Yeah, WOC in Scotland embargoed lots of different towns.
Yeah,
but eventually they gave it away. They pivoted at some point. But that was an interesting strategy to just make it very expensive to prepare fully, because you'd have to create all these different maps of all these different places, and you didn't even know whether you're going to ever use them. So that's another approach. Yeah, it's
maybe that's a way we get through a whole lot of mapping in New Zealand. We could say we're going to have WOC in one of these cities, get these foreign countries to map it for their elites, and then afterwards ask, hey, if anyone's got any maps around, do you reckon we could have them?
Entry fee payable in dollars or a map.
or figure out the square meterage of map that would correspond. You've talked a bit about New Zealand champs. Well, to say a bit, you've done a self-titled mega post.
I did, and I wanted to quiz you on a few things here.
I've refrained from reading it as instructed. I saw this and they're like geometry. I figured there's some maths here, which kind of like got me worried. So I quickly closed the tab.
Yeah, I think some people found this interesting. At least I did, so I wrote about it. Which one of these do you feel like is the shortest and which is the longest?
I think, well, just looking at it, I think D's the shortest, because I think it's a trick question going backwards from 2. It just the line looks the shortest. I'd say, is F the longest?
Yeah, we'll have a look further down. But I think it's that these things definitely act on my brain quite differently. So the shape of this has... It took me some time on doing all this analysis on quick route I use on my GPS routes afterwards, and deciding where is a mistake and where is not a mistake. And I came to some conclusions that we'll get to further down. The main thing I wanted, and I've got some examples of what these kind of deviations look like, 8 to 9. You can see this nice curve where I've just curved away from the straight line and then curved back, but there was never really a mistake moment in any particular part of the leg. Again, 13 to 14 here in this middle one. And we'll show, so this is some more specific numbers on exactly how far away from the straight line you are. So on A and B, you're very far away from the straight line on B. 34% the length of the line away from the line. Whereas D, you're overshooting by 10 and then coming back by 10. And I'm not sure if the numbers really help people's intuitions here. But I think when you do the analysis, you want to be aware of what these kind of deviations correspond to, so that you're not saying that A is a massive mistake when maybe it's actually not a massive mistake. There's a few other
straight is not always great.
Yeah, that's certainly something I've been saying for a long time. 15 is another good example of the overshoot, where I've run in the wrong directions for 45 seconds and come back. 4 to 5, we've got a squiggle. 9 to 10, that was a really good example of me. I was confused for a while, but I maintained high speed. And you can see that moment when I figured out exactly what's going on. And there's a really sharp change of direction straight to the control. So I've deviated. I never stopped. I still maintained race pace. How much time have I lost by doing that? Is this actually, it looks bad because there's no reason to deviate from the straight line. It's not a route choice. But how much of a mistake is it compared to faffing in the control circle? There's some other very clear examples of like these types of deviations and exactly, how they manifest in the terrain when you make these kind of errors and how to deal with them. And when you review them, which ones are actually big issues, which ones actually are costing you the big time. So we'll jump ahead. There's some other examples there. So the answer is, of course, it's always a bit of a trick question, but they're actually all the same.
Of course.
Yeah, of course, it's obvious in hindsight. But you felt like D was shortest. So did I. It looks so much shorter, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's at 20% extra distance, 10% past the control, 10% back.
True, yeah.
So is B. It's actually only 20% extra distance to get yourself 34% away from the line and back. So like saying, I made this massive mistake on B. Look how bad my GPS is. And then saying I made this small mistake on D where I narrowly missed the control and had to come back 10%. No, they're actually the same. They deserve the same amount of that kind of analysis and the same amount of training to prevent them, because they're both as significant as each other, and they both happen reasonably frequently. The control was behind a boulder and you skimmed past it, had to come back. B, took a terrible bearing, realized you took a terrible bearing because you hit a track and then sorted it out.
Do you think that like the shape analysis of individual routes could help as an analysis tool? Do you think being able to categorize your legs into one of these categories and somehow assigning like a time behind the winner or a time lost to each of them could be a way to help target what you need to work on? Or is that trying to find is that having a solution and trying to find a problem for the solution?
Yeah, possibly. I think it's just, I think that could be true. And I'm going to be investigating what more you can do with this. But for now, I think what's true is that if we want to be objective about our analysis, then we want to put the analysis where the time lost and the extra distance is being run. That means that you should be focusing on mistakes like D, where you're only just missing the control, just as much on mistakes like A and B. Whereas I've focused a lot on mistakes like A and B because it's so obvious on the GPS tracking. It looks so bad. You're so far from the line. But the truth is, when you're running at high speed and you're not faffing around, A and B are fine compared to C and D, which are all the same. So it's recalibrated where I put my attention when I'm doing the analysis. And like off the line losing time doesn't seem to hold up quite as well as it did before I just did this analysis, because F is just as bad as D. And if it's like you've got no interest in staying on the straight line.
Off the line, you're losing line time is high risk, high reward.
Yeah. So there's some other factors coming in, but I think the overriding theme that I think I'm trying to give this a read if you're interested. We won't go into it too much now, but from doing this analysis on all of my nationals courses, what I've realized is the time loss the majority of the time loss is not coming from the extra distance. It's coming from the time standing still. It's coming from the stumbling around in a confused state. when you look at the mistakes that I've made here, 8, I wasn't down that many seconds on 8. I was running fast the whole time. If we look at some of these mistakes later on, here I've only losing 10 seconds on 8 to 9. Only 5 seconds doing this wiggle here, because I was doing it on the fly, just maintaining high speed. So again, this looks bad. It looks so bad on the GPS, but I've only lost 27 seconds over the whole leg doing this extra, and I reckon I lost about 10% just coming into the control site when I realized I was wrong and I was starting to get confused, and then another 20 seconds doing this extra leg of the triangle that didn't have to be done. So you could easily have lost a minute, 2 minutes on that if you were faffing around with the relocation. So actually, maybe this analysis shows that it's actually not about which kind of deviation is worse than another. It's actually about the deviation is not the big issue here with orienteering. It's the relocation. It's the faffing around and the hesitation and the not getting yourself to an easy to relocate position, or not having a good relocation strategy. So maybe that's something we should go into next month. We should go into
indeed. Yeah, that's a mega post. That's something it's across on your blog, so people can have a read, and maybe we can go into a bit more detail next month. Last little bit of news was something from IOF.
Yeah, we got some updates on the questionnaire about what athletes would expect to see for the length of Women's WOC World Cup, World Games, JWOC, and Regional Championship course lengths.
Basically, should men and women have the same length winning times? Which
that was the question they were asking.
Yeah.
And it seems to be, I think,
unsurprisingly,
unsurprisingly, a good a trend towards increasing the length of the women's courses.
Two-thirds agree.
Yep. And there's some different degrees on how much people agree. What I'm really interested in is what these numbers would look like when it's just the women's elite answering. I would like to see how their views have changed as women's sport gets more supported and athletes get fitter. And we'll see where the preference of the athletes is. So there could be some changes coming up.
Tove could still smash us on a long. So I think there's your answer.
He's
good
incredible
to see IOF actually doing something for this, which is good.
That's right. They've got lots of these little working groups now that seem pretty proactive and actually asking the community some stuff. So so that's cool.
Indeed. Cool. So that is our news and other segments for this month. We're a little bit late, just in May, but it means we're closer to you heading away because with WOC being on the cards. Is there anything you're adding in special for your preparation for Europe this year?
Yeah, well, I am going to be doing more sprint orienteering training, and I quite like sprint O intervals. So doing these short, high intensity bursts and really pushing the navigational intensity up. I'm going to be doing some of them. Preparation wise, I've got a few niggles that I'm still kind of managing and hoping to increase the training load throughout this period. But it's quite a short period. So I've just had 2 weeks off, so I'm feeling fresh physically, which is good for like really smashing out a good 4 weeks of training and then some easier weeks. And I'm going to be going over a week and a half before my first race. So I'll have some time to go over there and look at the terrain, do a lot of walking in the terrain and not in the race terrain, but in similar maps that they've recommended we used, do my own navigation training out there and just get really intimate with the mapping style and just spend hours walking around these maps. So that's how I plan to do it. And I think that's really fitted quite well with what's worked well in the past. Familiarity has been I think a big contributor to the races that I've done well at and ones that I haven't done well at. Do you have any past experiences where you feel like your preparation was better than others?
Preparation better than others. I think probably when I tried to be too concrete on my plans and I tried to control things too much, I didn't go so well. Needed to be able to go with the flow a bit. I also think being in a good place when you left New Zealand and feeling like you'd done the work here rather than trying to move mountains when you're in Europe was a good thing. And finally, that being able to just get used to not just the terrain, but just being somewhere that's different, being able to spend some time in Norway before WOC in 2010 and just get used to being there and the food and how the place works and the climate. I think that's really good. Trying to take in the fact that you're on the other side of the world, having an amazing time, as well as the racing, I think helps with that mental state.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that trying to move mountains in the final week has always correlated with terrible performance.
Definitely, yeah. The hard work's done. Tired. The hard work's done here in New Zealand, not in the final training sessions before World Champs.
Yeah. So if I could pass any advice on to the juniors heading away and the World Unis team later in the year, also that you can't cram the training for this. You do as much as you can, and then you do a little bit just to sharpen up on a few final points before you get into racing. And other than that, there's not much more you can do. So train hard while you're in New Zealand and take the last few weeks easy, but do some specific stuff. Sounds good. So that's what I'll do. Yeah.
Well, we will catch up before you go and do have at least one more of these. But otherwise, have a good month of training.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. See you around. If you liked the show, please support it by sharing this podcast with one person who would benefit from it. The best place to find more content like this is at genebeveridge.nz, where you can find years of training blogs, race reports, podcasts, and coaching videos. If you don't want to miss future episodes, I recommend subscribing to my newsletter by visiting genebeveridge.nz or by following on social media, Perfect Flow on Facebook and Gene Beveridge on Instagram. For Q&A, send messages to nav@perfectflow.nz.